Today, we're cracking the code on a big one, Cambodia's 2023 Law on Taxation. Now, if you live here, work here, or run a business here, this is something you'll definitely want to know about. It might seem like a maze, but don't worry, we're going to break it all down for you nice and simple.
Yeah, I get it. A legal document with 255 articles? That sounds intense. But that's exactly why we've put together a simple map to guide you through it all. We're going to focus on the big ideas so you can see how everything fits together without getting buried in legal jargon.
And here's our map for today. We'll kick things off with a big picture, the single most important idea in the whole law. Then we'll dive into taxes on what you earn, what you buy, and what you own. After that, we'll look at what it means for businesses, and we'll wrap it all up with the fundamental rule of the game. Ready? Let's go? All right, first up, the big picture. Before we get into any of the nitty-gritty details, percentages and tax types, we need to get our heads around the one core principle that the entire Cambodian tax system is built on. Seriously, everything else we talk about today flows from this one single idea. And here it is, the self-assessment regime. So what does that actually mean? Well, Article 6 of the law puts it plainly. The responsibility is on you. Whether you're an individual getting a paycheck or a business making a profit, you are responsible for figuring out what you owe, telling the government, and paying it. The ball is in your court. That's the foundation for everything. Okay, so with that big idea in mind, let's move on to our second section, taxes on what you earn. This is a huge one because it affects pretty much everyone, from employees to massive corporations. So, the law splits taxes on earnings into two main buckets. First, for individuals, you've got the tax on salary. This is a monthly tax that your employer just withholds right from your paycheck. Simple enough. But for businesses, it's called the tax on income. That's an annual tax that the company itself has to calculate and pay based on its profits. So what's that magic number for businesses? For most companies, or what the law calls legal persons, the standard annual tax on income rate is 20%. Yep, 20%. As Article 20 points out, this is the baseline number you need to keep in mind for most businesses operating in Cambodia. But, and this is a big but, it's not always 20%. The government uses different tax rates to encourage or manage certain industries. For example, if you're in a business dealing with natural resources like oil or mining, you're looking at a higher rate of 30%. On the flip side, to attract investment, special qualified investment projects can get a tax rate of, wait for it, 0% during their tax holiday period. Okay, we've talked about what you earn. Now, what about what you spend? This brings us to our third section, taxes on what you buy. We're talking about consumption taxes, the ones that apply whenever you make a purchase. The big one here is the value-added tax. You've probably heard it called VAT. It's pretty straightforward. It's a standard 10% tax that businesses add to the price of most goods and services. So when you buy something, the business collects that 10% from you and then passes it along to the government. They're basically the middleman. But here's some good news. You don't pay VAT on absolutely everything. Article 63 lists some really important exemptions, mostly for essential services to keep them affordable. We're talking about things like public postal services, hospital visits, and public transport. Even basic things like unprocessed farm goods are exempt, so knowing what's off limits for VAT is super useful. All right, we've covered earning and spending. What's left? Owning stuff, of course. Our fourth section is all about taxes on what you own. This covers everything from renting out an apartment to selling land. This table breaks down the key taxes you'll run into with property. First up, if you rent out a property, there's a 10% tax on the gross rent you collect. Just for owning property, there's a small annual tax of 0.1% on its value. Then, when it's time to sell, there are two things to think about. There's a 4% transfer tax on the ownership change, and on top of that, a 20% capital gains tax on any profit you make from the sale. Let's switch gears and put on our entrepreneur hats. This fifth section is all about the key tax obligations you need to know if you're running a business. Now, this next one, the minimum tax, can be a bit of a head-scratcher at first. The best way to think about it is as a safety net for the government. It's set at 1% of your total annual turnover. Here's how it works. You calculate your normal income tax. If that amount is less than the 1% minimum tax, you pay the minimum tax instead. It just makes sure every business contributes something, even in a low-profit year. So what does a typical tax year look like for a business? Well, it's kind of like a 4-step cycle. First, you register your business.
Then, every year, you have to pay something called a patent tax by March 31st. Think of it as your annual business license fee. Throughout the year, you make monthly prepayments toward your income tax. And then finally, at the end of the year, you file your annual return to settle up and make sure everything's correct.
And that brings us to our final section, the rules of the game. We've gone through our whole map, we've looked at all these different taxes. So what's the one big takeaway you absolutely have to remember from Cambodia's 2023 tax law?
And look at that, we've come full circle right back to where we started. The law itself says it best in Article 6. It all comes down to self-assessment. The system requires you, the taxpayer, to do the work, calculate the tax, submit the forms, and make the payment. That is the #1 rule of the game. Look, I know tax law can seem complex, like some kind of secret code, but it doesn't have to be intimidating. Hopefully, this explainer has given you the key, a clear framework to understand the main principles, the different types of taxes, and what your responsibilities are. Now that you have that key, the real question is, what will you build?